All right, here's a short video on just how to incorporate quotes into your news article. So you have your factual base that maybe you've created that with ChatGPT or you've written the base, and then you want to add in quotes. So in the first scenario, when you're just taking quotes from a journal publication, for example, so you're not talking directly with the researcher, you have factual information, and then you also have something that perhaps the researchers could have said to you. All right, so if it's factual information, so in our talizumab article, if you look down here into the introduction section, you have this useful information that would be good for your background paragraph. You can say approximately 25 to 39% of patients with NSCLC have tumors that overexpress the c-MET protein, which may coexist with MET genomic alterations. All right, so that's some useful background information. So here it is. And then you can write that as leading in with, according to background information from the report, comma, approximately 25% to 39%. And you can see I've directly quoted that. And I'm using the phrase according to background information because that's what this is, all right? It's factual information. We want to show that it's from the journal article and it's something that you can include. So that's a way to do that in your background paragraph. There's another quote in here. You can see this is more conjecture or something that the researchers might have said. Although numerous clinical trials are evaluating targeted therapies against cancer with MET genomic alterations, there are currently no therapies available to specifically target c-MET protein overexpression. This is pretty factual, but it's also maybe even their opinion. And we're not going to fact check what they said, so we're going to include it as quotes. So it's as stated by the authors. Here's the quote that I just mentioned. And so what you would do is write that as a quote, although numerous clinical trials, blah, 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 end quote. And then you would say the author's note. Okay, the author's note, the author's state, or the author's rights in their article. All right, so you make it clear that you're not actually interviewing them. You're putting the information from the article into your news piece. You do not use the word said unless they really said it in a reply to you or in an oral presentation, in which case you would use the presenter's actual name, the one person who's presenting during the conference. You would say, Dr. Smith said during the conference or during his presentation. All right, so just be very factual, literal about where you're getting the information, make it very clear in your piece. Then also you can paraphrase whatever's in the article. So you might say, according to the researchers, and then you can insert a paraphrase of perhaps they have a long, unwieldy quote that you don't want to use the whole quote, but you want the information from the article. You can insert a paraphrase. And you do not use quotation marks when you're paraphrasing, but you would just say, according to the researchers. So that's how you handle that, okay? Don't ever use quotation marks unless you're directly taking something from the source, and don't forget to use them when you do that too. All right. And then when you have quotes from an email or phone interview, it doesn't really matter if it's a phone interview or an email response, but it's like a direct interaction with the researcher that you've had. You may need to brush up or fix up a quote, and you want to be careful to maintain the exact original meaning when you do that. Don't take it out of context. Don't include only part of the quote if the entire quote's needed. If in doubt, you do want to run the piece by the researcher or paraphrase it. So you say, according to Dr. Camage, and then you would use the paraphrase of the quote, but you would not use quotation marks. When you have maybe a couple of different quotes from a researcher, so you got a good reply back to your email, with the first quote, you want to use the phrase Dr. Camage or the researcher told, and then whoever you're writing for. So it might be Medscape Medical News, Reuters Health, Doctor's Guide, whatever publication you're writing for. You want to indicate that they told you, your publication, that information, which makes it really clear that you were in a direct interview with them, not just taking comments from their presentation. All right, that's really important. So that's upon first reference. And then additional quotes, you can say, for example, Perhaps he told you in the email the adverse event profile among patients with non-squamous NSCLC was generally consistent with those of other agents. So perhaps you got that back in an email. You would say, he said. And then maybe he also said peripheral sensory neuropathy was the most common adverse event observed. And I'm not using quotes because I'm rewriting it there. Okay, so use quotes if it's a direct quote, and then you can add in additional information and paraphrase it. All right. It's a little complicated, but just think, okay, what am I truly representing here? I don't want to make it seem like he's talking to me when he's not. And I don't want to directly lift something out of the article without quoting that information. All right.